The university auditorium had always been my sanctuary. Here, among young minds, time seemed to stand still. It was my escape from reality, a place where I could lose myself in the world of literature and ideas. I spoke with passion about books, but sometimes, even in the middle of the most engaging lecture, a wave of emptiness would wash over me. It came suddenly, like a light dimming in a room. My relationship with Tom was stable. I couldn't say we lacked anything in the conventional sense. We lived a quiet life, without big conflicts or major changes. Tom was always there, supportive in all my endeavors, and I was there for him too. We talked about everyday things, planned vacations, sometimes watched movies together in the evenings. Everything was right, logical, like a well-tuned mechanism. But sometimes that mechanism seemed to be running on idle. There wasn't the same pull between us as there once was. I remember our early days, long conversations, the thrill of touch when even the slightest brush of hands felt electric. Over time, that feeling faded, replaced by routine. I couldn't say I was unhappy. It was more that I missed the spark, the fire that makes your heart race when you look at your partner. Now it was just quiet, comfortable routine. I knew I loved Tom, but something had changed. As I continued the lecture, my thoughts kept drifting back to Tom and me. I tried to focus on the subject, but I could feel something inside me slowly fading. And then the door gently creaked open. A new student walked in. Something about his presence immediately caught my attention. Tall, with an easy, confident stride, and an expression that seemed both open and enigmatic. He didn't rush, taking his time to look around before settling into a seat in the back, as if he had been there many times before. I kept speaking, but I couldn't help but notice my eyes drifting back to him. He sat, listening attentively, and every so often his gaze met mine. The moment was brief, but somehow important. There was something barely perceptible, yet tangible, that passed between us. After the lecture, I decided to go to the library. I needed to grab a few books for my next class. This had become a small ritual for me, wandering between the shelves, finding something that could inspire discussion. In the quiet of the library, I often found a moment of peace, a way to distance myself from the things that had been troubling me recently. The library was almost empty, just the way I liked it. I slowly browsed the shelves, inhaling the familiar scent of paper and ink. A few textbooks were already on the table, but my thoughts drifted back to the last lecture. And Jake, his confidence, the way he looked at me, it stirred something within, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I was about to return to my reading when I saw him. Jake stood by one of the shelves flipping through a book. I glanced away, but it was too late. He had seen me. With a slight smile on his lips, he walked over slowly. "Emma Andreevna, may I join you?" His voice was soft, almost intimate, but still completely appropriate. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of excitement at his presence. We started by discussing literature, the books I had recommended during the lecture. But soon the conversation turned more personal. Jake spoke with such ease, as if we had known each other for years. He shared bits of his life, his thoughts, and I realized I hadn't felt such genuine interest in someone's words for a long time. "Literature," he said, gently flipping through the pages of a book. "It's not just words on paper. It's a mirror to our souls. Sometimes, while reading, we discover things we're too afraid to say aloud." I paused, trying to understand what exactly drew me to this young man. His directness, his confidence, but also a certain mystery. He wasn't just a student. There was something more, something I couldn't quite grasp. "Emma Andreevna," he continued, looking straight into my eyes. "How about we grab a coffee? It feels a bit stuffy in here. A conversation over a cup of coffee might be even more interesting." I don't know why, but I agreed. We found ourselves in a small cafe near the university. Over tea, the conversation became even more personal. He opened up more, and I started to feel something stirring in my heart, a passion, a thirst for life, for something new and dangerous that I thought had long been lost. After the evening at the cafe, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. His words, his gaze, the ease with which he spoke about everything had lodged itself firmly in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a casual conversation, but something deep inside told me otherwise. The next morning, as I stood before my closet, I found myself choosing clothes more carefully than usual. I picked a dress I rarely wore to work and applied a bolder shade of lipstick. Looking at myself in the mirror, I tried to believe that I was doing it for myself. I just wanted to feel good, to feel refreshed. But the truth was, I knew it wasn't just for me. Before I could leave the house, Tom caught up with me. He looked at me with a playful smile and narrowed his eyes. "You're looking especially beautiful today," he teased. "What, did some student catch your eye?" I smiled back, brushing off his words lightly, but inside a sharp pang hit me. "Oh, Tom, don't be ridiculous," I joked. "I just wanted to lift my spirits." But deep down, I knew there was more truth in his innocent joke than he could ever imagine. That realization both unsettled and excited me. I couldn't deny what was happening between Jake and me. That day I felt a shift in the air when I arrived at the university. A sense of anticipation followed me. When Jake appeared in my office doorway, I already knew this conversation wouldn't be just another consultation. "Emma Andreevna," he said, entering with the same confidence I had grown used to. "I wanted to discuss the project." He sat across from me and we started talking. At first, it was all formal, discussing plans and ideas, but I couldn't ignore the charged atmosphere between us. Everything felt too personal, too intense. At one point, our hands brushed against each other. It happened so quickly, but I felt a wave of warmth surge through my body. We both froze for a moment. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I realized the boundaries we were not supposed to cross were beginning to blur. I knew that our relationship was no longer just professional, and that I could no longer resist the pull between us. We continued meeting. After lectures, under various pretexts, Jake would invite me to dinner, a cup of coffee, or just a walk. Each time I told myself it was just innocent meetings, discussions about projects or interesting topics. But with every encounter, those meetings became less formal and more personal. The cafe where Jake and I had dinner again was dimly lit, and rain had begun to fall outside the window. He looked at me with that same quiet confidence that both attracted and terrified me. I tried to convince myself that it was just another discussion about literature, but our conversations had long since moved beyond books. "You know, Emma Andreevna," Jake began, putting down his fork and looking at me intently. "Every time I talk to you, I feel like you understand me on some deeper level. It's not just about the books. It's something more." His words cut through me. I felt my heart tighten with guilt. Tom? He knew nothing. I continued coming home, living our ordinary life, pretending that nothing was happening. But with every evening like this, the lie became more palpable. Jake understood something about me that I couldn't even admit to myself. "I don't think this is right," I said, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "We shouldn't be crossing these lines." But my words felt weak compared to what I was feeling inside. I knew I attracted him, and I knew that his attraction to me was real. Every time our eyes met, I felt the tension, the fire sparking between us. "And what if we stopped worrying about lines?" Jake said quietly, his voice holding a subtle challenge. And I felt his words sink deep into me. I tried to resist. I knew this was wrong, that I had a duty to Tom, to our family. I tried to convince myself that this was just a fleeting infatuation, something that would pass. But the more time I spent with Jake, the stronger the pull became. Tom. His jokes had a truth that I found unbearable. I knew that when I went home, I would look into his eyes and try not to reveal my thoughts, my feelings. Inside, a deep conflict was growing. The passion that had ignited between Jake and me was too strong to ignore. But every time I thought of Tom, the guilt swelled, tearing me apart. This dinner at the cafe wasn't just another meeting. It was the moment when I realized I could no longer deny my feelings. But I also knew that now I stood at a crossroads, between duty and desire. And that choice weighed heavier on me with each passing day. After yet another lecture, when the university was quiet and empty, Jake and I found ourselves alone. The students had long since left, and the evening light lazily filtered through the windows, casting a warm, dim glow over the campus. I could feel the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. Neither of us spoke, but the unspoken pull between us had been building for days. "Emma Andreevna," Jake's voice broke the silence, and there was something in his tone that made me shiver. We stood close, but it felt as if his presence was enveloping me, drawing me into a space between reality and desire. "Yes, Jake." I tried to sound composed, but my voice came out soft, almost a whisper. He stepped closer, and I felt the heat radiating from him. Jake's hand gently but deliberately brushed against mine. It was like a spark, making me hold my breath instantly. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I knew I couldn't run from what had been growing between us. He took my hand, his fingers closing around mine gently, testing how much he could allow himself in this moment. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. "You know," he said softly, moving even closer, "sometimes you have to take a step even when it feels like the wrong one." He didn't wait for me to respond. Jake leaned in slowly, and before I realized it, his lips were on mine. The kiss wasn't just a soft brush. It was deeper, more intense, as if with every second we were both being pulled into a whirlpool of passion. My head spun and I couldn't think about anything else. In that moment, everything was simple and clear. I wanted this. Every part of me responded to his touch, and when his hand, almost instinctively, slid under my skirt and rested on my thigh, I didn't stop him. "You're showing promise as a capable student," I whispered through the kiss, trying to regain some semblance of control, but knowing it was just a fleeting moment of irony, masking my true desire. Jake paused for a second, his eyes flashing with both mischief and hunger. We both knew this wasn't the time or place. We were in the university, and that thought, like cold water, brought me back to reality. My breath quickened and my heart pounded, as if warning me of the danger. But resisting was nearly impossible. Inside, I was torn apart. I knew this was wrong. Tom. He had no idea. Our life at home went on as usual, but here, in this moment, all boundaries, all moral lines disappeared. There was only Jake and this unbearable desire. "We can't." "Here," I whispered, pulling away for a moment, trying to find the strength to stop. But even as I said it, I knew I had already crossed the line. There was no going back. Returning home after that kiss with Jake, I felt a storm raging inside me. It wasn't just the physical closeness, but the fact that the moment had become a point of no return. I could still feel his touch on my skin, even hours later. My mind was consumed by his image, and I could barely think of anything else. But with each step closer to our house, my heart tightened with guilt. Tom knew nothing, suspected nothing. He had always trusted me, been my rock. Our relationship was quiet, calm, like a sea on a windless day. And now that calm threatened to collapse under the weight of my secret. When I walked through the door, Tom was in the living room. He looked at me with a gentle smile, but I could feel that smile fade as he noticed something was off. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice soft but attentive. "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "Just tired." My words came out too quickly, too sharply, and I knew he noticed. Tom walked closer, placing his hands on my shoulders, just as he always did when he wanted to show his care. But in that moment, his touch felt foreign to me. I couldn't relax, couldn't give in to his affection, knowing that another fire had already been ignited inside me. "You've been distant lately," Tom observed, watching me closely. "Is everything all right? I feel like something's changed." I knew I couldn't be honest with him. If I told him the truth, our world would collapse. So instead, I chose the lie. "No, everything's fine. Work's just been a bit more demanding," I smiled, trying to make it convincing. "I probably just need some time to myself." He nodded, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. Tom trusted me, and that trust was becoming an unbearable weight on my shoulders. Each night I lay beside him, feeling how his warmth grew more foreign to me, while my thoughts of Jake consumed me more and more. I tried to resist, tried to convince myself that this was just a fleeting infatuation. But with each passing day, the pull toward Jake grew stronger. His image invaded my thoughts, my dreams, and I couldn't shake it. My heart was torn between my duty to Tom and my passion for Jake. And the further I walked down this path, the more I realized that soon I wouldn't be able to contain the storm within. The last lecture of the day was coming to an end. I finished explaining the material and closed the textbook, glancing at the students as they slowly gathered their things to leave. My eyes stopped on Jake. He sat calmly, waiting for the others to leave. "Jake, stay behind after class," I said quietly, making sure no one else could hear, and added with a light smile and a playful wink. The gesture surprised even me, but I couldn't stop what had already begun to stir within. This was the last lecture of the day, and as the doors closed behind the final student, the room fell into an unusual silence. I could feel the air thickening with anticipation. I had spent the whole day trying to hide my thoughts and feelings, but now, alone with Jake, it was impossible. Jake walked toward me, his steps slow, as if he knew there was no need to rush. We both understood that this was no longer just a conversation. This was the moment when the passion we had both been suppressing finally took over. He came closer, and without words, I found myself in his arms. His kiss was deep and intense, as if all the tension between us had finally erupted in a single moment. My back pressed against the edge of the desk, and I couldn't hold back. His hands roamed my body, and I no longer cared where we were. In that moment, there were no rules or boundaries. I felt his hands hungrily explore me, and I started to forget everything except this moment. When he laid me down on the desk, I closed my eyes, completely giving in to my desires. Our bodies moved in sync, every touch, every kiss filled with passion and the knowledge that we were crossing the final line. And then, a knock at the door, we both froze. "Emma Andreevna?" I heard the voice of the dean. He was standing outside, and it seemed like he had heard something. My heart stopped. Jake and I quickly pulled away from each other, breathing heavily as we tried to fix our clothes. I nervously straightened my outfit, trying to look composed, but inside everything was burning. We slipped under the desk like children, trying to hide. The silence, broken only by our heavy breathing, felt endless. The dean knocked again, but I didn't respond. I prayed he would leave. After what felt like an eternity of silence, I finally heard his footsteps fading away. We sat under the desk, hidden from view, breathing as if we had just survived something extraordinary. I closed my eyes, realizing I had just crossed a line from which there was no return. Everything had become much more complicated. But deep inside, I knew it was too late. I couldn't stop this now. I sat in the car, on the edge of a decision I couldn't take back. Jake had asked me to come to his place for the first time since our meetings had started. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I dialed Tom's number. I had to say something believable, something that made sense. Scenarios flashed through my mind, but each one felt too suspicious. Finally, I settled on the simplest excuse. "Hey," I said when Tom answered. "I'm going to be late. I'm helping a few students prepare for the upcoming competition, and they need some extra guidance." A moment of silence on the other end, but then Tom replied in his usual kind voice. "Of course, don't worry. Just make sure everything goes well. If you're home late, I can make dinner." My heart clenched at his kindness. The lie was becoming a heavier burden with every passing day. Inside, I was torn between my duty to him and what I felt for Jake. But I thanked him and hung up, knowing there was no turning back now. Jake's apartment was simple but cozy, reflecting his youth and freedom from material attachments. There was a certain careless ease in the air, as if he lived here in his own world, detached from reality. As I stepped inside, I felt all my internal barriers begin to crumble. Here, away from everything that reminded me of my family, I allowed myself to forget. Jake was close by, and his embrace gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in a long time. Our meetings were becoming more passionate, more hidden. I found solace in his touch, his voice, his presence, forgetting that I had a life and a husband waiting for me at home. Every moment with Jake felt like an escape from my responsibilities, from the guilt that was slowly eating away at me. But reality couldn't be erased. It came back to me in quiet moments when I was alone, and silence took over. Jake, always so sure of himself, finally said it one evening as we lay next to each other after hours of passion. "Why don't you leave him? Start a new life. With me?" His words caught me off guard. I knew deep down that our relationship would lead to this question eventually, but hearing it out loud was more jarring than I expected. I froze, trying to process his suggestion. Yes, I felt alive with him, desired. But my family? Tom. I couldn't just destroy everything. "It's not that simple, Jake," I whispered, turning away. "I have a family. I can't just throw it away. For this?" He pulled me closer, his lips brushing against my neck, and I felt that unbearable pull once again. But inside, a conflict raged. I knew I couldn't live in this duality forever. Every moment with Jake became more dangerous. Each step I took led me further from reality and closer to him, but the fear of destroying everything I had with Tom weighed heavily on me. The balance between passion and duty was becoming more fragile, and my actions more reckless. Coming home was becoming harder with each passing day. Tom had started noticing the changes in me, and his questions were becoming more direct, as if he were trying to get to the truth that lingered between us. But I did my best to stay calm, hoping I could hide the reality behind simple excuses. "You're home late again," Tom said one evening as I walked through the door. His voice was steady, but there was tension beneath it. He sat at the kitchen table with my phone in his hand. "You've been staying late a lot. What's going on?" My heart sank when I saw the phone in his hands. Panic flared inside me. What had he seen? Had I made a mistake and everything between me and Jake was about to be exposed? "I've just been helping the students prepare for the competition," I began, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. "They have a lot of questions and I need to spend extra time with them." "I looked through your messages," he interrupted, and my heart clenched even tighter. "You've been texting one of the students a lot, Jake, right?" There was not just concern in his voice, but suspicion. I could tell he thought something more was going on, but at that moment, I had to find a way to defend myself. Quickly thinking through my words, I looked up at Tom. "Yes, Jake is one of the students preparing for the competition," I replied. "We're just discussing topics and assignments. He's a talented student, and he needs a bit more attention." I watched as Tom studied me carefully, looking for any sign of deception. But I knew that my messages with Jake had been neutral enough. Yes, there was warmth, maybe even a few jokes, but nothing inappropriate. I tried to project confidence to reassure him. Tom didn't look away, but his shoulders seemed to relax slightly. He glanced back at the phone screen, as if searching for something that could confirm his suspicions. "You're sure you're not hiding anything?" he asked, his voice softer now, though there was still a trace of doubt in his eyes. "Tom," I sighed, stepping closer, "I'm not hiding anything. We're just texting about schoolwork. I'm sorry you're feeling worried, but it's really not what you think." He nodded, but I could see the uncertainty hadn't fully left him. Inside, my emotions were tearing me apart. Part of me felt relief at being able to explain myself, but another part was crushed by the weight of what I was truly hiding. The pull toward Jake was growing stronger, and I knew I was playing a dangerous game. The lie that saved me today might not work tomorrow, but for now, I had managed to diffuse the situation. Tom handed me the phone, but his gaze lingered on me longer than usual, as if he still wasn't entirely convinced. "All right," he said quietly, standing up from the table. "But if something's wrong, if there's something you can't tell me, I want you to be honest." I nodded, though I knew honesty had not been an option for a long time. The past few days I'd been feeling strange. My body seemed to rebel against me, making it hard to focus on everyday tasks, reacting too sharply to everything. I brushed it off as stress, the tension that had been building between me, Tom, and Jake. But one morning everything changed. I suddenly felt nauseous, violently so. Rushing to the bathroom, I clutched my stomach, trying to calm myself. Standing in front of the mirror, I realized that something was happening, something more than just stress. My eyes lingered on my reflection. Something was off. My stomach ached, and the thought I'd been trying to push away began to creep into my mind. I couldn't wait any longer. A few days later, I made an appointment at the clinic. As the doctor invited me into the room and started asking questions, I tried to remain calm, but inside everything was trembling. After the examination and tests, I waited for the results in the sterile, cold room. "Emma," the doctor said quietly, returning with the results, "you're pregnant." The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. My heart stopped, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. I stared at the doctor, but his words felt distant, like they were coming through a fog. Pregnant. I was pregnant. My thoughts began to race. The first realization hit me. Tom wasn't the father. We hadn't been intimate for months. I knew it was Jake. It could only be Jake. Leaving the clinic, I walked down the street in a daze, not noticing the people, the cars, or the noise of the city. I was overwhelmed with shock, and I didn't know how to process this news. The life I had so carefully constructed was now on the verge of collapse. Tom. How could I explain this to him? How could I destroy his trust, our entire family? And Jake? How would he react? Would he leave if he found out? There were no answers in my head, only chaos and fear. I couldn't think clearly, couldn't figure out how to escape this situation. My future felt shattered, and I couldn't see a way out. When I returned home, Tom was at work. Being alone in the house made everything feel heavier. I sat on the bed, burying my head in my hands, trying to process what had happened. Every thought led me to the same conclusion. I was trapped. I couldn't just disappear. I couldn't go back and undo it all. I didn't know what would happen next, and the uncertainty was tearing me apart. Lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling, I started thinking about how I could hide the truth. Tom couldn't find out. I had to come up with a plan, but time was running out. With each passing day, my stomach would grow, and I'd have to make a choice: tell the truth or hide it at all costs. Jake's apartment felt small and stifling that evening. I walked in, and inside I was a storm of conflicting emotions. I knew why I was here. I had to end it. This was the hardest step of my life, but I knew I had no other choice. Jake greeted me with his usual smile, but something in his eyes told me he sensed the tension. He was so confident, so calm, and that only made the situation more unbearable. "You look upset," he said, stepping closer, trying to pull me into an embrace. But I pulled away, unable to accept his warmth. "Jake, we need to talk," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. He froze, watching me closely. "I'm pregnant," I exhaled. The words I had been holding inside finally came out, filling the room with a heavy weight. Jake's expression shifted. He stood there staring at me, fully realizing the implications of what I'd just said. "That's amazing," he started, stepping toward me. "It's our baby. We can be together, start over, no more secrets." Tears welled up in my eyes. This was the moment that should have changed everything, but I knew I couldn't let it happen. "No, Jake," I said, looking away. "I can't be with you. I need to go back to Tom. This is his baby." The lie felt like a knife, but I said it with such firmness that I almost believed it myself. I saw Jake freeze, his face turning cold as he realized he had just lost everything he'd been hoping for. "You're saying it's not my child?" he whispered, his voice filled with pain and disbelief. "Emma, you can't just leave. We've been together. I love you." His words cut through me like a blade. I didn't want to lose him, but I knew this was the only way. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling the tears finally fall. "I can't continue this. I need to go back to my family. I can't destroy what Tom and I have." Jake stood still, as if trying to process my words. I saw the despair in his eyes, and it only made the pain worse. "Are you sure?" he whispered, taking one last step toward me, but I already knew I had made my choice. "Yes," I said firmly. "Goodbye, Jake." I turned and left his apartment without looking back. Inside, everything burned, and I felt hollow. But I knew I had made the right decision. I had to protect my family, even if it meant tearing apart everything I had with Jake. When I returned home, Tom was in the living room. He smiled at me as usual, but I felt something inside me break. I was sure of my decision, but it didn't bring the relief I had hoped for. That night, I lay in bed feeling empty, knowing that the only thing left to do was move forward. Returning home after breaking things off with Jake, I felt hollow, but I knew I had to act. The only thing that could save me now was Tom. I needed to convince him that everything was fine, that nothing had changed, and that the baby I was carrying was his. Tonight, everything needed to change. I stood by the bedroom window, watching the city fade into the evening's dark shadows. The thought of how long I could hide the truth kept circling in my mind. But before that truth could surface, I had a chance to fix things. Tom and I hadn't been close in over a month, and I knew this was my only moment to act. When Tom entered the room, I could see the exhaustion on his face. His eyes still held the worry from our recent conversations. But tonight, I couldn't let him continue asking questions. I moved closer to him, more boldly than usual, and I saw the surprise on his face. "Emma?" he asked as he felt my hand glide across his chest. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," I whispered, looking directly into his eyes. "I just missed you." My words sounded genuine, even though I knew there was more behind them. I felt his body tense, but before he could say anything else, I kissed him, passionately, in a way I hadn't in a long time. Tom froze, clearly shocked, but after a few moments he began to respond. His arms wrapped around me, and in his touch I felt the fire we had once lost reignite. It was like stepping back in time, trying to find each other again in the night. Our movements grew more confident, and I could feel that Tom was fully immersed in the moment, unaware that behind this closeness, I was hiding an attempt to deceive him. My heart ached with guilt, but I knew this was the only way. If we were together now, he would believe the baby was his. When it was over, Tom lay beside me, breathing heavily, but he seemed content and relaxed. I looked at him, trying to suppress the storm of emotions inside. I knew I had done the right thing. Now he would believe that the baby was his. But even with the relief I felt, the pain still burned deep inside me. The truth could come out at any moment, but for tonight I could close my eyes to reality. At least for a little while. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I did everything I could to hide my true thoughts and feelings, to show Tom that everything was fine. I convinced myself that I could handle it, that I could live with this secret. Every time we were together, I tried to be tender and attentive, making him believe that our relationship was growing stronger again. Tom seemed to believe it. I could see his face light up when we spent time together. He was happy. In his eyes, it seemed like our family was returning to normal, to the life we both wanted. He felt closer to me, and I could tell that he truly enjoyed the rekindled passion between us. "I'm glad things are good again," Tom said one evening as we sat down for dinner. "I missed these moments with you." I smiled, though inside everything was turning upside down. My heart clenched with guilt every time he said something like that, but I couldn't let him know the truth. All I could do was continue this act, for him, for our marriage. But with each passing day, my anxiety grew. I couldn't stop thinking about how long I could keep up this lie. The baby. When it's born, what then? What if it doesn't look like Tom? I kept telling myself that everything would be fine, that Tom would never suspect anything, but the fear for the future wouldn't leave me. Every time Tom talked about the baby, about how excited he was to be a father, I felt a wave of terror wash over me. I feared that at some point everything would fall apart. This perfect world I was trying to build felt so fragile. I did everything I could to act naturally, cooking dinners, keeping up conversations, and distracting Tom from any thoughts that might raise suspicion. But each day it became harder. The feeling that time was running out grew stronger, and I knew that soon I would be facing inevitable exposure. Still, Tom was happy. He began spending more time at home, excitedly talking about the future, about how our life with the baby would be, and every word of his felt like a dagger, reminding me that I was building this fragile castle on sand. I smiled, nodded, agreed with him, but inside I was desperately trying to figure out how long I could live with this lie. Each day it became heavier, but I hoped that if I could just keep it hidden a little longer, everything would work out. Yet the fear wouldn't let go, and while Tom saw new hope in me, inside, panic was growing. The evening at home was quiet and peaceful. Tom and I sat in the living room, the soft glow from the lamp lighting the room. He was talking about the future again, about what our child would be like, how he would take care of us. I nodded along, smiling, trying to keep my expression calm. But inside, everything was boiling. "Can you imagine what he'll be like?" Tom's voice was full of joy and excitement. "I think he'll have your eyes. I've always hoped our children would look like you." Every word echoed in my head, as if with each sound, Tom was bringing us closer to the moment when everything could fall apart. I couldn't even let myself think about what would happen if the truth came out. This child wasn't his, and I lived with that fear every second. But now, looking at Tom, I knew I had a choice. I had to hide the truth. I had to protect him, protect our family, even if it meant living a lie for the rest of my life. It would be hard, but I had to do it to prevent everything from crumbling. I would do anything to make sure he never found out the truth. "You'll be an amazing father," I said, looking into his eyes. My words sounded sincere, though inside something was cracking. Tom moved closer, wrapped his arms around me, and placed his hand on my stomach, as if protecting both of us. The moment felt so real, so right, that I almost believed everything could be okay. But inside, the fear kept growing. The fear that one day I wouldn't be able to keep this lie hidden. That one day, everything I had carefully built would fall apart. I could keep up this facade. I could do everything to make sure Tom never knew the truth. But every minute, every touch reminded me that my world was built on a fragile foundation. I had made my decision. I would do whatever it took to keep my family together. I would maintain this lie for as long as it was necessary to protect us, even if the fear would eat away at me from the inside. Tom believed in our future, and I had to make sure that future was real for him. But that future would be built on lies, and I didn't know how long I could carry that burden. The story ended on a tense note. On one hand, I felt a sense of relief because I had a plan, but on the other, that plan was built on deception. And the fear that it could all collapse one day only grew stronger with every moment.